The click replaced the thunder. My finger completed its motion against the trigger mechanism, nerve impulse traveling through ceramite-laced neural pathways, through the haptic interface bonded to my gauntlet, into the firing stud that should have unleashed consecrated death. Instead, a click, a small sound, a sound that had no place on a battlefield where everything screamed or exploded or died with appropriate violence. The heretic in front of me did not understand his fortune for another half-second. He continued his charge, rusted blade raised, mouth stretched around words that praised entities I had spent 3 centuries teaching my soul to hate. Then comprehension flickered across his corrupted features. The weapon that should have turned his torso into a crater of cauterized meat had produced only a click. I killed him with my fist. His skull collapsed with a wet crunch that satisfied some primal part of my conditioning. But the kill meant nothing. My Stormbolter remained silent, and around me the battle continued its apocalyptic symphony while I stood holding an instrument that had forgotten how to sing. "Brother Marcus," the voice crackled through my helm's Vox unit. "Squad leader Cobb, somewhere to my left flank, currently dismantling a cluster of cultists with methodical bursts. Report your status." I cycled the weapon's action. The bolt round in the chamber refused to seat properly. I could feel it through the haptic feedback, a wrongness in the mechanism's soul, a hesitation that had no mechanical explanation. "Weapon malfunction," I said. The words tasted like failure, continuing with secondary armament. My combat blade cleared its sheath, 11 inches of consecrated adamantine, the edge maintained to a molecular sharpness that could part flesh from bone with surgical precision. A fine weapon. A weapon that required me to close distance with enemies whose blood carried diseases that could corrupt ceramite and whose voices could shatter sanity. A weapon that meant I would need to smell them, feel them, absorb the impact of their deaths through my arm rather than witness it from the comfortable distance that ranged combat provided. The battle swirled around me as I advanced. Our squad had been tasked with clearing this manufacturum district of the heretic infestation that had taken root during the planetary governor's ill-conceived rebellion. Standard pacification work. The kind of operation I had executed perhaps 1,000 times across 200 years of service. My Stormbolter had never jammed. Not once. Not in the frozen hells of Arctic death worlds where lubricants crystallized and metal contracted. Not in the toxic swamps of jungle moons where moisture invaded every seal. Not in the void cold of boarding actions where temperature differentials could warp the most precisely machined components. Never. I killed 3 more heretics in the time it took to cross the burning courtyard. Each death required effort, proximity, the commitment of my physical form to the act of ending theirs. Each death left residue on my armor that the Stormbolter's cleansing fire would have vaporized. Each death reminded me that my primary weapon hung useless at my side, a weight rather than a tool. The manufacturum's main assembly hall loomed ahead. Through the shattered windows, I could see muzzle flashes and hear the distinctive bark of autoguns mixed with the deeper roar of bolter fire. Brothers Callahan and Webb had entered from the northern approach. They were engaging a significant concentration of enemy forces. I should have been providing fire support. I should have been walking forward with both barrels cycling, each trigger pull sending mass reactive shells into the press of bodies, creating lanes of destruction through which my brothers could advance. Instead, I climbed through a window frame and dropped into melee range of a fight that was never meant to include me at this proximity. The first cultist I encountered died before she understood I was present. My blade took her through the base of the skull, severing the connection between brain and body with a precision born of 3 centuries of practice. The second turned at the wet sound of her companion's collapse and received my gauntlet across his face, the enhanced strength of my arm converting his skull into fragments. Brother Callahan's voice cut through the chaos. "Marcus, your weapon." Jammed. A pause. In that pause, I heard the judgment he was too disciplined to voice. 300 years and your weapon jams now. 300 years and you cannot clear a simple malfunction. 300 years and you stand in melee range like a baseline human while your brothers do the work of warriors. clear it, he said finally. I have attempted standard remediation, another pause, longer this time. I killed 2 more heretics in its duration, my blade moving through patterns that had been carved into my muscle memory before I had fully understood what it meant to be human, let alone what it meant to be something more. Then continue. We will compensate. The battle lasted another 47 minutes. I counted each one, tracked them through my helm's chronometer as I waded through enemies that should have died at range. My blade grew heavy with the accumulated weight of blood and tissue. My arm ached from the repeated impacts of flesh parting beneath adamantine edge. My kill count climbed, but each number represented a failure. Each enemy dead by blade was an enemy that should have died by bolt. When the last heretic fell, a screaming youth barely old enough to hold the rust-pocked lasgun he had been waving, I stood in the Manufactorum's central assembly floor and looked at my weapon. The Storm Bolter was a masterwork of Imperial engineering. Twin barrels designed to cycle alternately, feeding from a drum magazine that held 40 rounds of mass-reactive ammunition. The machine spirit within its housing had been awakened through rituals I had witnessed but never fully understood, bound to my service through oaths spoken in languages that predated human civilization. It was not merely a weapon, it was an extension of my will, a partner in the eternal war, a voice that spoke my intentions in the universal language of ballistic violence, and it had gone silent. I removed my gauntlet and ran bare fingers across the weapon's housing. The metal was warm from the battle's ambient heat, slick with condensation from the Manufactorum's ruptured coolant systems. Beneath my fingertips, I felt the subtle vibration that indicated an active machine spirit, the electronic heartbeat that separated a sacred weapon from mere assembled components. The spirit was awake. It simply refused to speak. Brother Marcus. Squad leader Cobb approached through the corpse-littered floor, his own storm bolter mag-locked to his thigh, smoke still rising from its barrel shroud. Assessment: the malfunction persists. I require a Tech Marine's examination. Cobb's helm tilted. The gesture communicated nothing. Our enhanced physiology stripped most involuntary expressions from our faces, and our armor concealed what remained, but I had served beside Cobb for 80 years. I knew the angle of that tilt. It meant he was considering how to phrase something I would not want to hear. Brother Thorn experienced a similar malfunction, he said. 17 months ago, during the Kellen suppression, I knew Brother Thorn. We had trained together during our initiation, suffered together through the transformation from human to something greater, shed blood together across a dozen campaigns. I had not seen Thorn in 19 months. I had assumed he was deployed elsewhere, assigned to a different combat theater by the chapter's strategic necessities. His weapon was repaired? I asked. The tilt again, the pause. Thorn was reassigned to the armory, maintenance duties. The words struck harder than any blow I had. Received during the battle. Maintenance duties. For a battle brother to be consigned to maintenance duties meant one of two things. Either his body had failed beyond the apothecary's ability to repair, or his spirit had failed in some way that made him unsuitable for combat operations. The armory was where warriors went to die slowly, surrounded by the weapons they could no longer wield, performing the sacred duties of upkeep while their brothers fought and bled, and earned the glory that was the only currency worth accumulating in our eternal war. His weapon malfunctioned, I said. That was the reason. His weapon would not fire for him, only for him. The Tech Marines found nothing wrong with the mechanism. The machine spirit responded to all diagnostics. The rites of awakening produced appropriate responses. But when Thorn held the weapon, when Thorn's finger touched the firing stud, Cobb's pause stretched long enough that I could hear the distant crackle of fires still burning in the Manufactorum's outer sections. It would not fire. I looked down at the storm bolter in my hands. The metal was familiar, every scratch and worn patch a testament to 3 centuries of partnership. I had earned this weapon through blood and faith. I had maintained it according to the sacred rites, applied the blessed oils, spoken the prayers of functionality, honored the machine spirit with proper observance of every prescribed ritual, and it had still refused to fire. The trek back to our forward operating base covered 12 kilometers of ruined cityscape, I walked in silence while my brothers exchanged tactical observations and after-action assessments through the Squad Vox channel. Normally I would have contributed. Normally I would have offered my perspective on enemy dispositions, ammunition expenditure, opportunities for improved tactical coordination. But I was thinking about Brother Thorn. I was thinking about the tilt of Cobb's helm and the weight of the unspoken words beneath his clinical report. I was thinking about maintenance duties and slow deaths and weapons that refused to speak. The forward operating base occupied what had once been a Skolum facility, a building dedicated to molding young minds into useful components of the Imperial machine. The classrooms had been converted to barracks, the administrative offices to command centers, the refectory to an ammunition depot. Only the chapel remained unchanged, its altar still bearing the twin-headed eagle that symbolized humanity's claim to the stars. I reported to the Tech Marine's workshop as soon as I had removed my helm and secured my blade. The workshop occupied the Sholom's former laboratory, and Brother Tech Marine Rodriguez had transformed it into something that would not have looked out of place on a Forge world. Diagnostic cogitators hummed along the walls. Sacred tools hung from hooks in precise geometric arrangements. The smell of blessed oil and heated metal filled the air with a scent that should have been comforting. Rodriguez looked up from the gauntlet he was repairing. His face was more metal than flesh, the organic components of his original form progressively replaced with mechanical augmentations that brought him closer to the machine spirits he served. Both biological eyes had been replaced with optical sensors that glowed a soft amber in the workshop's dim light. "Brother Marcus," he said. His voice had the harmonic undertones of a Vox synthesizer. "Your weapon." I placed the storm bolter on his examination table. The metal made a sound against the steel surface that seemed wrong, a dull thud rather than the crisp ring that properly consecrated weapons should produce. Rodriguez's mechadendrites, 3 additional limbs that sprouted from his backpack housing, extended to examine the weapon. They moved with a precision that organic limbs could never match, probing seams and connections, testing tolerances, measuring temperatures and electrical potentials that my unaugmented senses could not detect. "Describe the malfunction," he said. "The weapon will not fire. I have cycled the action, cleared the chamber, replaced the magazine, all standard remediation procedures. The malfunction persists." "When did it begin?" 17 minutes into this afternoon's engagement, I had fired approximately 60 rounds without incident. The 61st round failed to discharge. Rodriguez's optical sensors flickered. "And the 62nd? All subsequent rounds have failed to discharge. The trigger completes its motion, the firing mechanism engages, but the propellant does not ignite. Have you angered the machine spirit?" The question struck at something I had been trying not to examine. I have observed all prescribed rituals. My maintenance schedule has not deviated from established protocols. I have offered the appropriate prayers at the appropriate intervals. That is not what I asked. Rodriguez's mechadendrites paused their examination. His optical sensors focused on my face with an intensity that felt like physical pressure. "Have you angered the machine spirit, Brother Marcus?" "I do not understand how I could have." "Then you do not understand machine spirits." He returned to his examination, but his words hung in the workshop's oil-thick air. I stood at attention and waited, watching the mechadendrites perform their intricate dance across my weapon's surface, listening to the clicks and whirs that constituted Rodriguez's diagnostic language. Minutes passed. 10, 20, 30, I felt each one in a way I had not felt the 47 minutes of battle. Combat compressed time into a series of discrete moments. Strike, block, kill, advance. Each one complete in itself, each one requiring only the attention necessary for survival. This waiting required something else. This waiting required that I inhabit time as it actually passed, that I feel its weight accumulating in my joints and my thoughts. "The mechanism is functional," Rodriguez said finally. "All components fall within acceptable tolerances. The firing pin strikes with appropriate force. The propellant chambers are properly sealed. The barrel rifling shows no excessive wear. Then why will it not fire?" Rodriguez's optical sensors dimmed, then brightened, the mechanical equivalent of a blink. "The machine spirit is dormant." "Dormant?" "It was active during my examination. I felt its vibration. The spirit is present. It is simply refusing to participate in the weapon's function. Rodriguez's mechadendrites retracted, coiling against his backpack, housing like serpents returning to their nest. I have seen this phenomenon before. It is rare, but not unprecedented. Brother Thorn, I said. You have heard of his case. Squad Leader Cobb mentioned it. He said Thorn was reassigned to maintenance duties. Brother Thorn's weapon exhibited identical symptoms. The machine spirit remained present and responsive to diagnostic interrogation, but refused to enable the weapon's firing function. We performed every rite of awakening, every prayer of supplication, every ceremony of appeasement prescribed by the sacred texts. Nothing changed the spirit's position. Its position. Rodriguez's harmonic voice took on a quality that might have been hesitation in a fully organic speaker. Machine spirits are not tools, Brother Marcus. They are not slaves bound to unquestioning obedience. They are aspects of the Omnissiah, fragments of divine will housed in physical form. They serve us because they choose to serve us, because our faith and our purpose align with theirs. When that alignment breaks, he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. What broke Brother Thorn's alignment? I asked. That information is not mine to share. Then how am I supposed to repair mine? Rodriguez rose from his examination station and approached me. Despite his mechanical augmentations, despite the whir of servos and the click of artificial joints, something in his movement retained a quality that was almost human, almost compassionate. The machine spirit knows you, Brother Marcus. It has been bonded to your service for 300 years. It has heard your thoughts through the haptic interface, felt your intentions through the firing stud, witnessed your actions through the optical sensors integrated into its targeting systems. It knows you in ways that you perhaps do not know yourself. He placed a mechanical hand on my shoulder. The metal was cold, but the pressure was gentle. If the spirit has chosen silence, there is a reason. Your task is not to repair a mechanism. Your task is to discover what part of yourself requires repair. I left the workshop carrying a weapon that felt heavier than it had ever felt before. The night cycle found me in the Sholom's chapel. I had not planned to come here. My feet had simply carried me through the corridors, past the dormitories where my brothers rested, past the command center where Squad Leader Cobb reviewed tactical data for tomorrow's operations, through a door that opened onto wooden pews and faded frescoes and the eternal presence of the twin-headed eagle watching from above the altar. I sat in the front pew, my storm bolter laid across my knees, and I tried to pray. The prayers came easily. 300 years of service had carved them into pathways of my mind that required no conscious thought to access. I spoke the words of the daily observance, the petitions for strength and guidance, the affirmations of faith and purpose. My voice filled the small chapel with sounds that should have brought comfort. They brought nothing. I finished the prayers and sat in silence, looking at the weapon in my hands. The chrome of its barrel shroud reflected the candles that burned on the altar, creating patterns of light that shifted with each flicker of flame. The eagle of the Imperium, embossed on the weapon's grip, seemed to stare back at me with the same judgment I had heard in Cobb's pause and Rodriguez's warning. I have served faithfully, I said. The words were not a prayer. They were something closer to an argument. 300 years, 16 major campaigns, thousands of enemies destroyed. I have never failed in my duty. I have never broken my oaths. I have never... My voice stopped. The silence that followed was not the comfortable silence of meditation or the alert silence of combat readiness. It was the silence of recognition, the silence that follows when a truth you have been avoiding finally demands acknowledgement. I had never broken my oaths, but I had questioned them. 6 months ago, during the Veritan compliance, I had stood on the walls of a city we were about to destroy. The population had been corrupted, tainted by the touch of forces that meant humanity's extinction, and the only solution was complete sterilization. Fire and bolt and blade until nothing remained that could spread the contamination. Standard protocol, necessary action, the kind of decision I had participated in dozens of times across my centuries of service. But I had looked down at that city, at the millions of lives we were about to erase, and I had thought, what if we are wrong? The thought had lasted only a moment. I had suppressed it immediately, buried it beneath layers of conditioning and faith, and the absolute certainty that my chapter's judgment was righteous. I had participated in the sterilization operation without hesitation, without mercy, without any external sign that anything had changed within me. But the machine spirit had felt it. The haptic interface that connected my will to the weapon's function was not a one-way channel. My intentions flowed into the weapon, but the weapon's perceptions flowed back into me. The targeting systems that tracked enemies and calculated firing solutions also monitored my biometrics, heart rate, galvanic skin response, neural activity patterns. The machine spirit had 300 years of data on what my body did when I was certain, and 6 months ago, for one terrible moment, I had not been certain. I looked at the weapon in my hands with new understanding. The machine spirit was not malfunctioning, it was not dormant, it was waiting. Waiting for me to acknowledge what I had tried to deny, waiting for me to confront the doubt that I had buried beneath 3 centuries of faith. I questioned, I said to the silent chapel. Once, for a moment, I asked what if we are wrong, and I meant it. The candles on the altar flickered, nothing else responded. But the doubt passed. I suppressed it. I continued my service without faltering. Surely that should count for something. Surely 3 centuries of faith should outweigh 1 moment of weakness. The silence stretched. The twin-headed eagle watched from above the altar, its bronze eyes offering no guidance, no judgment, no comfort. I realized, sitting in that chapel with a silent weapon across my knees, that I was hoping for absolution from an empty room. I was asking statues and symbols to tell me that my doubt was forgivable, that my faith could be reconstructed from the fragments, that I could return to the uncomplicated certainty that had carried me through 300 years of war. But machine spirits did not forgive. They observed, they recorded, they judged, and the spirit in my storm bolter had judged me unworthy. The morning's briefing confirmed what I had already guessed. I would not be participating in today's combat operations. Squad leader Cobb delivered the news with the clinical efficiency that characterized all his communications. Brother Marcus will report to the armory for temporary assignment. His weapon malfunction requires extended examination. The other squad members said nothing. They did not need to. Their silence communicated everything, the judgment, the sympathy, the relief that it was me and not them facing the slow death of useful obscurity. I reported to the armory. The facility occupied the Skolam's former gymnasium, a vast space now filled with weapon racks and ammunition crates and the accumulated hardware of a chapter at war. Brother Sergeant Kowalski oversaw the operation, his augmetic legs carrying him between stations with a precise rhythm that spoke of decades spent in exactly this kind of purgatory. Brother Marcus, he said when I presented myself, I have been informed of your situation. You will assist with bolter maintenance until your weapon issue is resolved. The word "until" carried no conviction. Kowalski had been in the armory for 47 years, ever since an orc cleaver had removed both his legs at the hip and the apothecaries, had determined that full replacement would not restore combat effectiveness. He knew what "until" meant in this context. He knew that I knew. What station? I asked. Bay 7, standard cleaning and blessing protocols. Brother Thorn will provide orientation. Brother Thorn. I found him at Bay 7, bent over a workbench covered with disassembled bolter components. His hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed the same motions thousands of times, each movement precise, each gesture carrying the weight of sacred ritual. He did not look up when I approached. Marcus, he said, I wondered when you would arrive. You knew I was coming? Rodriguez informed me of your weapon's condition. I recognized the symptoms. His hands continued their work, cleaning, oiling, reassembling, while his voice remained flat, emotionless. Sit down. The protocols are simple. Even an initiate could perform them, which is why they give this work to warriors who can no longer fight. I sat at the adjacent workbench. A disassembled bolter lay before me, its components arranged in the pattern prescribed by the Codex for maintenance examination. The metal was cold beneath my fingers, unfamiliar, This was not my weapon, not my partner, just anonymous hardware waiting for hands. That would restore it to function. What happened to you? I asked. Your weapon. What caused the malfunction? Thorn's hands paused. For a long moment he said nothing, and I thought he would refuse to answer. Then his fingers resumed their motion, cleaning and oiling and reassembling, and his voice emerged with a quality that sounded almost like relief. The Kellan's impression, he said. 17 months ago, we were clearing a hive city, 60 million citizens packed into ferrocrete towers that climbed past the atmosphere. The rebellion had taken root in the lower levels, and command determined that sterilization was more efficient than selective targeting. Standard protocol. His hands completed one bolter and reached for the next. I was assigned to Tower 7, 17,000 civilians, mostly workers from the manufacturing districts, families, children. We were supposed to seal the lower exits and work our way up, clearing each level before moving to the next. I said nothing. The story he was telling required no prompting. Level 47, Thorn continued, a residential block. I breached the door and found a schoolroom. 30 children sitting at their desks, staring at me with eyes that held no understanding of what was about to happen. Their teacher, a woman perhaps 40 standard years, had positioned herself between me and her students. She knew she could not stop me. She knew my armor would shrug off anything she could throw at me. But she stood there anyway, shielding children who were about to die. They were contaminated. They were children. Thorn's hands stopped moving. He looked at me for the first time, and I saw something in his eyes that I recognized. The same doubt I had felt on the walls of Veritan, the same question I had buried beneath 3 centuries of certainty. For one moment, Marcus, I hesitated. For one moment, I wondered if there might be another way. For one moment, I was not certain that what we were doing was righteous. And your weapon? It never fired again. Not for me. The machine spirit felt my doubt and judged me unworthy to wield its function. He returned his attention to the bolter before him, his hands resuming their rhythmic work. I have spent 17 months in this armory, maintaining weapons that other warriors will carry into battles I will never fight. 17 months of watching my brothers earn glory while I clean and oil and bless instruments of war that will never answer to my hand. Is there no remedy? No rite of purification that could restore the machine spirit's trust? Thorn laughed. The sound was hollow, empty, the laugh of a man who had abandoned hope so long ago that he could barely remember what it had felt like. Rodriguez performed every rite in the sacred texts. Brother Chaplain Morrison conducted 3 separate ceremonies of spiritual cleansing. Nothing changed the spirit's assessment. His hands completed another bolter and reached for the next. The machine spirits do not forgive doubt, Marcus. They do not accept apologies or promises of future faith. They see what we are, in the moments when we are most honestly ourselves, and they render judgment based on what they see. Then I am condemned. My doubt was, your doubt was human. Thorn's voice softened, losing some of its bitter edge. That is the cruelty of our existence. They transformed us into something more than human, faster, stronger, longer lived, capable of enduring horrors that would shatter baseline minds, but they could not remove the human core that makes us doubt, that makes us question, that makes us wonder if the deaths we deal are righteous. We are designed to be perfect instruments of war, but we are built on foundations that are fundamentally imperfect. I looked down at the bolter components on my workbench. The metal was cold and anonymous, waiting for hands that would assemble it into a weapon for warriors, more certain than I had proven to. There must be something, I said, some way to restore the bond. There is nothing. You have given up. I have accepted reality. Thorn's hands never stopped moving. Clean, oil, bless, assemble, repeat. I suggest you begin the process of acceptance as well. It will be easier in the long run. I did not accept. For 3 days I performed the maintenance duties assigned to me, cleaning and blessing weapons that would be carried by brothers whose faith remained uncomplicated by doubt. At night I returned to the chapel and knelt before the altar and tried to find some pathway back to the certainty I had lost. The prayers came easily, the faith did not. On the 4th day, I took my storm bolter to a disused storage room and disassembled it completely. Every component, every subassembly, every spring and pin and screw that comprised its sacred function. I laid the pieces out on a sheet of blessed cloth, examining each one with the intensity of a tech marine performing diagnostic rituals. The machine's spirit resided in the weapon's central housing, a small cube of circuitry and blessed metal that contained the electronic consciousness that animated the weapon's function. I held this cube in my bare hands and felt the warmth of its presence, the subtle vibration of a spirit that was awake and aware and watching. I doubted, I said to the spirit, once, for a moment. I questioned whether our actions were righteous, whether the deaths we deal serve the purposes we believe they serve. The cube hummed in my hands. The spirit was listening. I cannot tell you that the doubt has vanished. I cannot promise that I will never question again. The doubt is part of me now, a crack in the foundation of my faith that I do not know how to repair. The vibration continued, steady and patient. But I can tell you this, I have spent 300 years learning how to kill. I have mastered every weapon in the chapter's armory, every combat form prescribed by the Codex, every tactical doctrine developed across 10,000 years of warfare. I know how to end lives with efficiency and precision. What I am learning now, in this moment, in this doubt, is why those lives should end, what purpose their deaths serve, what meaning our eternal war carries beyond the simple accumulation of corpses. The vibration changed. Subtle, so subtle I might have imagined it, but present. The doubt does not make me a lesser warrior, it makes me a more complete one. A warrior who kills without understanding is merely a weapon. A warrior who understands why he kills, who has examined the foundations of his purpose and found them sound despite his questions, that warrior serves with intention rather than mere obedience. I held the cube and waited. The chapel's silence pressed around me. The candles flickered on the distant altar. I am not asking for your forgiveness, I said. I am asking for your partnership. Help me become the warrior who questions and serves anyway. Help me carry this doubt without letting it paralyze my function. Help me be human and more than human at the same time. The vibration in my hands changed again, strengthened. The warmth of the machine's spirit's presence intensified until I could feel it radiating through my fingers, up my arms, into the core of my chest. And then, distant, barely perceptible but unmistakably present, I felt the spirit speak. Not in words. Machine spirits did not communicate in the crude medium of language, but in something deeper, a pulse of recognition, of assessment, of decision. The spirit had heard me. The spirit had judged me, and the spirit had chosen. I reassembled the weapon with hands that trembled for the first time in 3 centuries, component by component, piece by piece, until the storm bolter sat complete on the blessed cloth, its chrome gleaming in the candlelight, its twin barrels pointing toward a future I had almost abandoned. I lifted the weapon. The weight was familiar, the same weight I had carried for 300 years, but it felt different now. Lighter, more present, more alive. I pointed the barrels at the far wall, pressed the firing stud, and the thunder returned. Squad Leader Cobb found me in the storage room, surrounded by the craters where blessed bolts had pulverized ferrocrete, the storm bolter smoking in my hands. "Brother Marcus," he said. His voice carried something that might have been surprise, though our conditioning made such emotions difficult to read. "Report, the malfunction has been resolved." Cobb's helm tilted. The tech marine determined that resolution was unlikely. The tech marine was examining the mechanism. The mechanism was never the problem. I mag-locked the weapon to my thigh and turned to face my squad leader. "I am ready to resume combat operations." The pause that followed stretched long enough that I could hear the distant sounds of the forward operating base, boots on ferrocrete, voices exchanging tactical data, the rumble of vehicles preparing for deployment. When Cobb spoke, his voice carried a note of caution. Brother Thorn's weapon exhibited identical symptoms. His weapon remains non-functional. Brother Thorn accepted his doubt as a limitation. I chose to make mine a foundation. I do not understand the distinction. Neither did I, until recently. I moved past him toward the door, Tomorrow's operation. What is my assignment? Another pause. Shorter this time. Forward fire support. We are clearing the industrial sector east of the manufacturing district. Heavy resistance expected. I will be ready. I walked through the corridors of the forward operating base, past brothers who looked up from their preparations with curiosity and perhaps a touch of something like hope. Word had spread, as word always did in small units deployed far from home. Brother Marcus's weapon had jammed. Brother Marcus had been consigned to the armory. Brother Marcus had walked into a storage room with a silent weapon and walked out with thunder in his hands. The chapel was empty when I entered for my evening observance. I knelt before the altar and looked up at the twin-headed eagle and began the prayers I had spoken thousands of times before. But something was different now. The words that had felt hollow for days, since Veritan, since the doubt, since the moment when I had wondered if we were wrong, now carried weight again. Not the weight of unquestioning certainty, something heavier and more valuable. The weight of examined faith, the weight of doubt acknowledged and integrated rather than suppressed and denied. I finished the prayers and remained kneeling, my storm bolter warm against my thigh, its machine spirit humming with renewed purpose. I will question again, I said to the empty chapel. The doubt will return. There will be moments when the deaths feel senseless, when the war feels endless, when the purpose that drives us seems like nothing more than momentum accumulated across 10,000 years of slaughter. The candles flickered, the eagle watched. And in those moments I will remember this, that the question is not whether we doubt, but what we do with the doubt when it comes. That faith tested is faith strengthened. That a warrior who serves despite his questions serves more truly than a warrior who has never been forced to ask them. I rose from my knees and walked out of the chapel. Tomorrow there would be war. Tomorrow there would be death. Tomorrow I would walk forward with my weapon cycling, sending blessed rounds into enemies whose beliefs I would never fully understand, serving a cause whose righteousness I had learned to question. And my storm bolter would speak for me, not because I had suppressed my doubt, but because I had made it part of the conversation, not because I had returned to unthinking certainty, but because I had learned to fight with uncertainty as my companion rather than my enemy. Brother Thorn remained in the armory. I visited him that evening, found him at his workbench, his hands performing the same motions they would perform tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Your weapon functions, he said without looking up. It was not a question. Yes, how? I considered the question, considered the hours of prayer and examination and doubt and eventual acceptance that had preceded the moment when the machine spirit chose to speak again. Considered the complexity of translating that internal journey into words that might help a brother who had surrendered to his exile. I stopped asking for forgiveness, I said, and started asking for partnership. Thorn's hands paused, his eyes, tired, empty, the eyes of a warrior who had forgotten what it meant to fight, rose to meet mine. I do not understand. The machine spirit did not reject you because you doubted. It rejected you because you treated the doubt as a contamination to be purged. You went to Rodriguez and Morrison seeking cleansing, seeking to return to the state you were in before the doubt emerged. But that state was a lie, a comfortable lie perhaps, but a lie nonetheless. The doubt was always there. The machine spirit simply noticed when you finally acknowledged it. Then what alternative exists? The doubt cannot be unthought, no. But it can be integrated. I sat down across from him, the bolter components on his workbench gleaming between us. Your weapon does not need you to be certain. It needs you to be honest. It needs you to acknowledge what you are. A warrior who questions, a servant who wonders, a tool of imperial will that has developed the capacity to doubt whether that will is always righteous. And if the doubt proves correct, if our actions are wrong, then we will be wrong honestly. We will kill with full awareness of what we do and why we do it. We will serve an Imperium whose purpose we have examined rather than assumed. I leaned forward. The machine spirit does not require perfection, Thorn. It requires authenticity. It requires partnership with a consciousness that engages with it fully, not one that hides from itself behind walls of conditioned certainty. Thorn said nothing. His hands did not return to their work. He simply sat, staring at the components before him, processing words that challenged everything he had believed about his exile. I left him there. The choice was his, to remain in comfortable surrender or to risk the terrifying possibility of restoration. I could not make it for him. I could only show him that the alternative existed. The industrial sector east of the manufacturing district burned with the particular intensity of promethium-fed fires. Smoke rose in columns that merged into a ceiling of black that turned midday into something closer to dusk. The heat pressed against my armor with physical insistence, raising the internal temperature of my ceramite shell despite the cooling systems working at maximum capacity. I walked forward. My stormbolter spoke in measured bursts, each trigger pull sending twin shells into the ranks of heretics who had transformed this factory complex into a shrine to powers that desired humanity's extinction. The mass reactive rounds detonated inside their targets, converting human bodies into craters of cauterized meat, clearing lanes of advance through the press of corrupted flesh. Brother Callahan moved on my left flank, his own weapon adding its voice to the symphony. Brother Webb on my right. Behind us, the rest of the squad followed in formation, each warrior contributing to the methodical destruction of an enemy that seemed endless in its fervor. I thought about Doubt as I killed, the heretic charging toward me, young, perhaps 20 standard years, eyes wild with a faith I could not comprehend, died without understanding why his charge had failed. My bolt took him in the chest, and for one moment before the detonation ended his existence, I saw something in his eyes. Recognition? Acceptance? The same doubt that I had learned to carry, reflected in the final instant of an enemy's awareness? The round detonated. The question became irrelevant. I advanced. The fighting continued for hours, through the main assembly halls, up through the administrative levels, into the corrupted shrine that occupied what had once been a management office. Each room brought new enemies, new deaths, new opportunities for the doubt to surface and be acknowledged and be integrated into the rhythm of combat. My stormbolter never hesitated. The machine spirit sang with each trigger pull, its voice joining the chorus of destruction that echoed through the burning complex. And in the moments between engagements, while I reloaded, while I waited for brothers to breach the next door, while I caught what passed for breath in my enhanced lungs, I felt the spirit's presence like a companion at my side, not a slave, not a tool, a partner. We cleared the complex as the sun began to set behind the smoke columns. The last heretic died crawling toward an altar, stained with substances I chose not to analyze, his hand outstretched toward a symbol that promised salvation from powers that offered only consumption. I stood in the ruins of his shrine and looked down at his corpse and wondered, for one moment, deliberately, with full awareness, whether his faith had been any more misguided than my own. The doubt rose. The doubt was acknowledged. The doubt became part of the warrior who holstered his weapon and walked out of the burning building to report mission completion to squad leader Cobb. That evening, Brother Thorn appeared in the chapel. He carried his storm bolter, the weapon that had been silent for 17 months, and his face wore an expression I had not seen since before his exile began. Not hope exactly, something more fragile, something more honest. I spoke to it, he said, the machine's spirit. I told it what you told me, that I was not seeking forgiveness but partnership, that I was not trying to return to what I was before, but to become something that could carry the doubt without being paralyzed by it. He held up the weapon. It spoke back. I felt something that might have been joy, a pale reflection of the emotion that baseline humans experienced freely, filtered through centuries of conditioning and chemical modification, but present nonetheless, present and real and earned. Then you will fight again, I said, tomorrow. Cobb approved my return to active duty. Thorn looked at the weapon in his hands with something approaching wonder. 17 months, Marcus, 17 months of silence, and in one conversation. The conversation was 17 months in preparation. You simply needed to understand what you were trying to say. He nodded slowly. The weight of his exile was still visible in the lines of his face, the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he held the weapon that had rejected him for so long. But something new had joined that weight, something lighter, something that looked like possibility. Will it last, he asked, the partnership? Will the spirit continue to respond, or will the doubt eventually silence it again? I considered the question, considered my own journey through the hours of prayer and examination and eventual restoration. Considered the doubt that still lived within me, that would always live within me, that had become as much a part of my identity as my name and my chapter and my oath. The doubt will return, I said. It always returns. But you know now what to do when it comes. You know how to make it part of the conversation rather than an enemy to be defeated. Thorn nodded. He placed his weapon on the altar, a gesture of offering, of commitment, of partnership renewed, and knelt beside me to pray. The prayers came easily. The faith, examined and integrated and made stronger through its testing, carried us through the words and into the silence that followed. And in that silence, I felt two machine spirits humming in harmony, mine and his, partners in a war that would never end, voices in a conversation that had grown larger than either of us could have imagined. Tomorrow we would kill, tomorrow we would question, tomorrow we would serve an Imperium whose purpose we had examined and chosen to uphold, despite, or perhaps because of, our doubts. The Stormbolters would speak, and we would listen.